You're welcome to the third session in our workshop series for summer holidays, Ivy. If you are seeing this before summer holidays, consider signing up. If you are seeing it after, Vacationspars would have lots more workshops. You can always check out our YouTube channel for more. Today, we are going to be talking about sports, and we have with us Faithfulness. Faithfulness is a sports lawyer, and he's well versed in all issues concerning sports and how you could probably use this in debate. And he's going to be taking us through the session. Thank you so much for joining us. You're welcome, Faithfulness.
Thank you very much for having me. Um, I mean, it's a pleasure to always it's always a pleasure to speak to debaters. Um, to and it's always a pleasure to apply realities that we encounter in the professional setting to the debating ecosystem. Something I like. So yeah, I'm happy to be here and gearing to go.
You can take us through what you would like us to know about the world of sports and how it's all the legal underpinnings that keeps the machinery running that the ordinary person might not catch, and how maybe we could use those things if it ever like pops up in motions.
All right. So this presentation is going to be a bit slow and I mean I prefer it to be more of a discussion, and I understand that nobody in a BP debate, I mean BP debates makes us assume so many rules. Sometimes you have to think like a doctor, sometimes you have to think like a sports lawyer, sometimes you have to think like the greatest philosopher, moral philosopher on earth, sometimes you have to be a lawyer, a criminal lawyer, you know. I mean, the idea is British parliamentary debate. So at the end of the day, we're discussing issues, and politicians, are not supposed to be experts on all topics and all conversations. So I'm not going to be trying to make anybody an expert in sports law, because I think being a debating expert, you naturally know how to navigate whatever waters, though murky, though smooth. So debating experience and debating knowledge can always be trusted, when applying the principles from any particular ecosphere. However, of course, like there are certain things that helps. There's certain information that can give you an edge. There's kind of understanding that if you have, can make uh, these kinds of motions around sports and all of these quite significantly easier. So the thing, first of all, I mean, when we talk about the sports world, sports ecosphere, one of the first things that you learn as a sports lawyer is the unique legal status of sports. For most of European sports, I mean, the most popular sports in the world is football. And within the European ecosphere, we know, or most people should know about the reality that, um, Europe has a special status. There are many regulations that govern free movement of people, free movement of labor, that ensure the absence of monopolies and hegemonies within systems and ecospheres. So EU regulations heavily regulate the system. And what you then find is that sports, by its very nature, by its very organizational nature, has certain components intrinsic to it that, are at loggerheads with the vision of the EU. For instance, all members of the EU nations are supposed to uphold the principle and the value that you're allowed to work in any country at any particular without any restrictions whatsoever, without any periodical restrictions, without any limits. There's supposed to be free movement of labor, but then you have within the football community what we all know as the transfer window, and the transfer window goes against that principle. So in creating the footballing structure, in seeing how football has so many examples that easily, that easily, have friction with the European system, we then had to create the principle called the specificity of sports. So it's Lex Sportiva. So it creates a self-contained legal system where, governing bodies within the footballing ecosystem act as monopolies, um, bypassing legal courts, national courts through mandatory arbitration system. So, that's another thing that everybody must understand. Like within European sports, European football, you don't take your disputes to, the orthodox courts. If you have a dispute with a football club as a player, you cannot take that dispute except in specific instances. Of course, there's always an exception, but the general rule is that you have to go to the relevant footballing authorities, which one will understand is contrary to the spirit of the European Union. And so that is an exception that the EU had to grant football to say, okay, handle your disputes. Why is that the case? Because things have to be done faster. Speed, for instance. If a club and a player have a dispute, transfer window is closing in 30 days, how do you have that kind of very speedy resolution of the conflict that exists? Because the courts have a backlog of issues and you cannot prioritize footballing issues when they're criminal issues, they're civil issues, they're commercial disputes. So football kind of is like a princess or sports that you give special treatment. And the specificity of sports as a concept is that kind of special treatment that comes. So I think this is something that is a, at least within our world, it's a debating topic. It's a debatable topic. State courts do not have the domain expertise in many instances to understand the nuance of the footballing system. If you go to a judge who has never watched football, who doesn't give a care in the world about football, and you want to speak about transfer window, oh, the transfer window is closing. You'll be like, what the hell is a transfer window? Oh, this player signed this player. Like, there's just so much, insider knowledge in a sense that makes footballing just, a very unique um, ecosystem. But of course, Lex Sportiva as a concept has its own downsides. It creates an unassailable, almost lawless enclave where the fundamental rights of players, worker protection, and basic human rights can be insulated uh, from the accountability that you get when the public is fully in on each and every one of those issues. So you have many clubs maltreating players, knowing that the only recourse is to the standard systems. Once in a while, players, say screw the system, and they drag the issues outside of the footballing, world, outside of the sporting world, and take it to the national courts. And the national courts many times can say, well, the doctrine of the specificity of sports has to hold. And other times, the courts can say, not in my court. That nonsense will not apply here. And you have people who kind of spoil the vibes, and I think there have been many cases like that that have gone to challenge the core of the system. Everybody in sports law, in the business world knows that there is a court of arbitration for sports. I think it's something that all debaters should know. Just for the sake of it, is in Switzerland. Um, it oversees most footballing, basketballing, all sporting cases, mainly within the European ecosphere, maybe a bit of the North American ecosphere too, but largely, I think most of the cases come from the European um, system, and but they don't hear most cases in the first instance. You have to, for example, if you have a dispute in football, you have to go to the FIFA dispute resolution chamber, or any of the relevant FIFA bodies. Some cases can be heard by the National Football Association or Federation, depending on what it is. And the Court of Arbitration for Sports typically hears appeal cases. So that is for the generic view of the sporting ecosystem. But of course, it transcends the conversation has to transcend that because we've just spoken about the European system. But there's also something that has been a very big conversation, debate topic within the sporting ecosphere, and that is the open European pyramid system versus the closed US franchise model. Anybody who comes into, sports realizes that America is different. American franchises, the NBA, I'm a big fan of the NBA, and in the NBA you have 30 teams. I think they are planning an expansion soon, but you have 30 teams, and those 30 teams cannot be promoted or relegated. There is a certainty that they are always going to be there. And uh, there's that closed system. The MLS is the same. I think they're probably the conversations around introducing relegation. But then when you look at the footballing ecosphere, it's a pyramid. You have the first division, second division, third division, fourth division, there's relegation. Of course, people will say that that means that there is intrinsically more meritocracy. Um, and something that the Europeans pride in. Of course, we know that sports cannot be insulated from the broader societal patterns, and we know that American the Americans are very capitalist. America is a very capitalistic society, so the emphasis is always around the franchises, around the money that they can make, around coalescing things, giving the billionaire owners more predictability. It does have its own benefits. I like the lottery system, the draft system. It helps. It creates kind of like some people say it rewards mediocrity, but I think it just gives fighting chance to everyone. You have the chance to get great talents. Um, so in the NBA, there's a draft. The worst teams are giving preferences in the draft to pick players from the collegiate system, and so that's something that you don't have in the footballing world. Most players are bound or tied to academies, so it's more academies in the European ecosystem and not the college system like in the United States of America. So the European system, something that the Europeans pride in, competition, meritocracy, the unpredictability. A good team can be relegated. We have seen Tottenham last 2 seasons, Tottenham Hotspur, one of the most prestigious, teams in the Premier League, boasting of the most modern stadium, um, was in a relegation dogfight. So that threat, that risk, West Ham, who got relegated in the Premier League, one of the bigger teams in the Premier League. So it means that there is more, there's more bite, there's more unpredictability. Everyone has to fight. You cannot just be, oh, I'm a Premier League club, I'm a big club, so I'm going to be here always. It removes that complacency. Um, Basketball franchises sometimes can have down years. So, oh yeah, this season we don't want to do much. We're going to lose this season and just tank, and then get a, some huge talents in the draft, and then we rebuild. You don't have that in European football. We know that there was the attempt to create the Super League, which was a direct challenge to the ethos um, of the European world, and I think everyone saw the backlash you know that received. Um, the courts, however, affirmed Real Madrid's rights to create such initiative because of the fact that the European system is largely against monopolies, and it seemed like FIFA and UEFA were monopoly, and Real Madrid challenged that. They won, but of course the footballing world already lost the appetite for that idea, seeing that the fans had already reacted very hysterically. So I think that's that for this. The open system. I think it's something that is worth knowing how these two worlds collide. I think at a tournament like Worlds, where you have American debaters, you have European debaters, I guess it becomes a tussle around whose narrative prevails. Is it football or is it soccer? and everyone has the autonomy to decide. So within the footballing world, for example, FIFA and the federations have monopolistic regulatory power. Um, so they they have to be governing bodies. Um, they have to be regulators, and they also have to be profit maximizing commercial operators. And that, leads to frictions, leads to its own problems. You know, FIFA runs a very insulated, um, almost a very insulated structure. There's They're not accountable to anyone. They're not accountable to any governments. They pride in their independence. There have been so many cases, and I think I wrote a paper in 2023 on FIFA's, independence or alleged independence from external or third-party interference. There have been many times where they have banned countries for interference. I think I wrote about Iran, where the FIFA intervened to ban them, I think, because they said there was interference. But we know again that these things are not consistently applied. Uh, Anybody who watched the World Cup, has an idea that we saw some external infringement on what should have been a fair tournament. So these things are bound to occur. But yeah, there's a football pyramid. The pyramid, it's not just doesn't just function based on the leagues and the relegation structure and the incentive. FIFA exists. After FIFA, you have the continental bodies. You have CAF for Africa. You have UEFA or UEFA for Europe. Uh, CONCACAF. You have CONMEBOL. You have all the regional bodies that govern football. And then after them, you have the national federations. And then beneath them, you have the leagues, the league authorities. So in England, you have the FA, Football Association. England is the only country that calls themselves um, Football Association instead of like English Football Association or Spanish Football Association. And the reason that they do that is because they invented football. It's a game. So yeah, then after the leagues, of course, the leagues, you have the pyramids, you have the grassroots. So that is just the structure in football. I think if you understand the pyramid system, pyramid structure within the European footballing ecosystem or sporting ecosystem, talking about football because of course like that's where I do most of the work that I do in sports. Um, yeah, in America, you have the leagues. The leagues are largely independent. Too, the NBA can do what it wants. The NBA is the governor, has the leeway to do what it wants. Yeah, an interesting difference that I like, which I think is also very good for debates. And one thing I like about the American system is that there is, more player power. The players get into bargaining agreements with the leagues, or in all the leagues, there's a bargaining agreement that dictates the tempo of their relationships, that determines the interactions that they have. So the players have to agree on the salary cap, what the salary cap is. The owners can say we want to have 55% of the revenue, and the rest of that is shared amongst the players. And they have that friction, they have things around ethics. The basketball players, they have their representative in the player association, and the players negotiate different points. I think one of the more interesting parts that I found in the last bargaining agreements between the NBA and the player association was that the players wanted to smoke weed, something as I'll say infinitesimal as that, and after long negotiations, the league allowed them to smoke weed. That's a very innocuous example, and I'm choosing that deliberately because it just shows you the kinds of things that the player associations can negotiate. I learned from watching Jalen Brown. He's an NBA player. He did an interview recently, and he said, the NBA player association charges dues from the players, and from those dues, you're entitled to a legal counsel, to advice, to even agents, for nothing. They work for you. So it's a very healthy system. I think that's something that is missing in football, although implementing that in football will be very hard because you have not just one league like the NBA, you have a diverse pool of leagues everywhere that you go. The next thing is the domestic leagues versus the slides using domestic leagues versus governing associations. Here, I don't think that there's a lot of friction always between the domestic leagues and the governing associations. Um, sometimes there can be clashes, but the hierarchy um, allows the footballing associations federations to have more um, leeway. But one of the very important responsibilities of the um, the football associations or federations is to ensure that there is a redistribution of resources, that the lower leagues are looked after. They have negotiations around things like parachute payments. So sometimes they act as mediators between the higher leagues and the lower leagues. So um, a good example is that in British football, in the Premier League, you have the Premier League not wanting to pay huge amounts to the lower league. So, like when clubs are relegated, they have problems. That problem is that when a club goes from Premier League revenue downwards, it's a downward spiral. So imagine you're earning Premier League money, 100 and something million, and then you go and your revenue nosedives to what, 20 million? Like it's a huge problem because you had contracts, you had a lot of things, that were problematic. So the Premier League then decided, okay, we are going to pay these clubs a particular amount for 3 years, like to just keep them at the level and sustain that. So it's not just a very sharp nosedive, but it's a steady decline. If they come back up, like within those 3 seasons, then fine. That became a problem because the clubs in the lower divisions felt like it was uncompetitive. It made the league uncompetitive because those teams came and they had 3 times the revenue of other teams. So in those 3 years, they had a higher chance of getting promoted than they did. So it became a conversation about maybe perhaps making the payments harmonized across the various teams in the second division. And so the FA, for instance, negotiates this issue. So their primary motive should be, ensuring the redistribution of resources, cross subsidization of the lower teams in the pyramid. They oversee refereeing, infrastructure, um, non-commercial community sports. Whereas the leagues themselves, the authority, or the mandate that they have is internal, and the mandate is to maximize revenue. The leagues are not thinking of the overall picture, the bigger picture of, oh, let's make Spanish football great, let's make English football great. The leagues are just saying, let's make the Premier League as great as possible. The FA says, let's make English football as great as possible. That is how to view both of those bodies. In the US, you have conversations around the NCAA, the NCAA. The NCAA, I think, is the um is the body that oversees collegiate football sports um in the US, and historically they generated billions of dollars in revenue because there's lots of interest in college sports, and since it's very predictable because like every US athlete goes through the college system. So you know who is going to be great in the future. Like everybody watched the 17-year-old, 16-year-old, 15-year-old LeBron James. Everybody watched the 16-year-old, 15-year-old Michael Jordan. As a matter of fact, I think in the NCAA tournament, he hit the game winner for North Carolina many years ago. So it's easy to track the greatness. So like you already know the guys that are going to go to the league. That makes them marketable. But the NCAA had a policy that the college athletes shouldn't get paid. So it became a huge problem, a huge force, a huge scandal. I think there's been a Supreme Court judgment in the US that has allowed them to receive their payments. But I think this is something that it's a very interesting point. Anybody who's looking to improve their knowledge of sports, American sports, should look into that. The system is a lot better. But yeah, you cannot speak about American sports without speaking about the NCAA. So the next thing is club revenues. How do clubs make their money um, within European sports? Within American sports, clubs make money from um, tickets. I think it's the same across board. From match day, um, match day ticket sales. Clubs make money from broadcasting rights, which is where a huge chunk of their money comes from these days. And many leagues have been very innovative um, you know, around around this aspect of broadcast rights. In the early 2000s, the US, no, the Premier League actually, in the early 90s, in the late 90s and early 2000s, the Premier League went out to the world and gave their viewing rights for free. And went to Asia, went to different parts of Europe, and said you guys can watch the Premier League for free. And people were watching the Premier League, and they got stuck with it. They got into it. They loved it. It was like crack, sorry to say. And when the people became addicted to it and wanted it, they then started charging a premium for it. So it was very clever. It's a very clever thing that the Premier League did. The Premier League makes an astronomical amount of money. I think the Premier League alone makes more money from broadcasting, from selling their broadcasting rights than the rest of the top five leagues combined. Last I checked, because I gave this. I think I had a podcast. I was on Erasmus' podcast, and we discussed this. And this, I think this was one of the. I can't remember the specific numbers now because it's been a while. Perhaps others have caught up, and it might not be as wide, but the disparity was really really stark and alarming when I looked into it. So the Premier League makes a ridiculous amount of money in the US. Different broadcasters. The NFL is quite popular. And yes, sorry, I've not spoken about the NFL because the NFL is the most popular sport in the US. So the NFL, everybody knows about the Super Bowl and the broadcasting numbers that are quite ridiculous. But I mean, the World Cup comes every now and then and just shows to be the king. So FIFA makes a very ridiculous amount of money. FIFA, operates every year. I think FIFA makes a loss of around 1 billion or 2 billion, and every 4 years when the World Cup happens, they make they cover up the losses. They make like 5 billion. They're about to cover up the losses plus an extra 5 billion that lasts them. So the broadcasting rights that FIFA sells for the World Cup, amazing, incredible. The ads that they sell, so are also quite crazy. So FIFA makes money, in that way. The leagues make money from selling the broadcasting rights. Excuse me. And this is something that is quite crucial because to sell the broadcasting rights, you must have more than one good team. So this is a consideration, for like in debates. You can have investments in countries. You have PSG, for example. All the investment that has happened from Qatar, I think. You have all of that, but you have just one good team in the league. But I think 2 years ago, they struggled to sell their broadcasting rights. I think it was 1 or 2 months before the season started that they finally found broadcasters who were willing to buy the rights to air the game. So these things are. I'm not. I don't want to go deep into it because, like I said, it's just for conversation, but just to understand and perhaps like research more. But you have these things. Of course, you have sponsorships on jerseys. You have uh, eh, all jersey sales themselves. Nike will make the jerseys for you. How it happens? Nike makes the jerseys. Adidas makes the jerseys. They pay you up front, maybe 10 million a year, and they go do the marketing and do the sales and make their money back. Um, so uh, so I think that is that. I have spent a lot of time here already. But then an interesting concept within the football world now is financial fair play. Uh, and financial fair play is quite crucial to modern football. The reason why financial fair play exists is because clubs many times in the past spent ridiculous amounts of money, put themselves in trouble, or owners spent ridiculous amounts of money, put the clubs in trouble, made the clubs to be relegated, and of course they ran away. They did. They sold their shares in the company. So there was just so much. Clubs were spending way more than they had, uh, way more than they earned, rather, um, and it was unsustainable. So financial fair play rules were introduced to ensure predictability in expenditure. Uh, the the general principle is in a 3-year period, your finances must break even. Your expenditures must break. You must break even. I think that was UEFA standard initially. But we have seen the Premier League intensify PSR, taking it to new heights because, of course, the Premier League is the richest league in the European ecosphere. So they felt more pride, more of a need to regulate what happens within their league. And PSR uh, um, sustainability rules have existed to ensure that clubs do not act crazy. So the PSR rules, however, allow for losses. I think the losses are around, you can make between 30 and 60 million um, pounds loss within a 3-year window. So the reality is football is it's a game. We know it's profitable, but clubs lose a lot of money. So there are some clubs that burn 10 million every match day, that lose 10 million every match day. So it's very hard to say clubs shouldn't lose money. That's why UEFA, for example, said you must break even every 3 years. So they expect that there has to be a period where you do better. There's a spike in your revenue and in your fortunes. But many clubs just stay afloat. Many billionaires do not look to football like for profits. They look to football for visibility. Many investors in football do so either sometimes to to many times, like you see Qatar, for example, investing in football, PSG and all these clubs, they're not making so much money you know, but from football itself. They're making money from the brands that they infuse to the football. So you have Qatar Airways. Everybody knows Qatar Airways now because Qatar Airways has embedded itself within the footballing ecosystem. That's one of the reasons. So they have other brands, they have other ideals that they try to go. Some people just love football. Some owners just love football. Football is cool. You hang out with the big boys. You gain popularity because many people have money, but they do not have popularity. I did not know who Jim Ratcliffe was. Now the minority owner of Manchester United, but I do, and he was a billionaire. He had maybe 10 to 12 billion dollars. Every fact I give, please feel free to chat GPT or Gemini or Claude, whatever. It's really more about just the point I'm making than the precise fact. So Jim Ratcliffe was a billionaire, but he buys Manchester United, and he becomes at the center of things. I feel like there's been a bit of him pushing his own political agenda too. He appears to be right wing leaning. So there's that. So football, many owners lose, but ownership is not always, private. Ownership can be public in a sense. So you have clubs like Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, who are owned by the fans. So they're owned by the socios in Spain, for example. And the big clubs have elections, and the socios vote on who the president is going to be, and the president then runs the club on behalf of the people. So it's almost like FIFA. Uh, FIFA president is elected, and is a custodian of things. Doesn't own the club. Fiorentina Florentino Perez is a businessman, he's a wealthy businessman. I think he's into construction, if I'm not mistaken. So he's a billionaire. I think he's worth privately maybe $2 billion or thereabout. So he's a billionaire, and the club is kind of like a side project, but it's not like I mean it's not very incredibly difficult to run a club. It's something that you can combine, and I mean you cannot be a Real Madrid president without having a real day job, because for you to be qualified, I think you have to give a bond of around 100 million euros or something like that. Like the threshold is really high. So you must be successful as a businessman. You must have other ventures that you're doing. Barcelona is the same. I don't know the financial threshold to be president, but it's a publicly owned club, which gives the people, the club, the socios, the members more power, more of a sense of belonging. I have been in Barcelona. I've watched the games at Santiago Bernabéu. I understand how the Real Madrid system works. I understand the feeling of being a socio. I registered. I was a social when I was in Madrid. I registered, but I mean, I didn't attend any meetings or paid any dues. I just like I bought I became a social. I bought the social membership tickets just because I wanted to. It gives you an edge to buy the season tickets and gives you early access to jerseys and stuff like that. So I bought it, but I was very passive. But I have friends who are, socials in the social sense. I have friends who are socials of Barcelona. So there is just more of a sense. In the UK, I think the most you can do is you're a season ticket holder, and that's being a social, but you're just a season ticket holder. You're not a member of a club. You're not voting. You don't have any like so much of a say in how things go. So I think that's that. Financial fair play. If you want to look at UEFA, the system is a bit different. It's stricter than the PSR system. We have seen many clubs try to game the system. We have seen Chelsea try to be smart and game the system, reporting certain figures, manipulating figures in ways that perhaps not illegally, but just finding more and more and more loopholes to exploit. Um, Chelsea sold their women's team to themselves to record it as a profit, on their books. They sold their parking lots to themselves. So there are interesting ways clubs have manipulated the system. I will allow the listener to go find, just research. This is so easy. Put on ChatGPT. What the hell is this guy saying? And then you get information. Um, there's player amortization and strategic accounting, because revenues are like fluctuate in football. Many times a year, a player has been sold for 100 million. That 100 million is not paid immediately. It's paid across a particular, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 installments. But even then, when a player is signed for 50 million, amortization within the accounting system of the PSR rules or the FFP rules means that you divide that transfer figure by the amount of years he was signed for, and you add his yearly salary to it. So the yearly figure of the player becomes the transfer figure divided. Let's say he signs for 5 years, 50 million divided by 5, 10 million. Let's say his salary is 2.5 million a year. So his yearly cost is 12.5 million. So for every accounting year, the amount that is factored in is the 12.5 million. So if he has lived out 3 years of his contract, there are 2 years left. That player on the books is no longer a 100 million player. He's what is left. So 10 for the 2 years left, plus 5 million for the 2 years of salary left. And that player becomes 50 million and becomes worth 30 million. So that's why you hear sometimes like um, some some clubs sell a player who they signed for 100 million for 50 million, and they say they made a book profit, because it means that the remaining years of his value, the amortized figure, um, they sold him for double of the amortized figure, for example. So that is that. In the NBA, you have in the American system, you have salary caps, you have luxury taxes, you have draft systems. It's a whole different world completely. So you have a limit to what you can pay, and that allows for competition. If the salary cap is 150 million, for instance, 114 million, you have 15 players on your roster. your roster. You cannot have then three players who are going to be earning 50 million each if your salary cap is 150 million. You have to be clever. You need to have some who are earning 10 million, some who are earning the minimum. What's the minimum in the NBA? Is it 2.5 million? Between 2.5 million and 5 million, I think is the minimum. Probably, yeah, I think 2.5 million is the minimum NBA salary. Yeah, I can't remember the exact figure, but yeah, like there's a minimum, like the all players, and that's negotiated by the player association in the bargaining agreement, and then there are the salary caps. Sometimes you have luxury taxes. So if you go over the salary tax, you pay. So they can say for every 10 million that you go over the tax, you pay 500K, or for every 10 million you pay 20. You can even they can even say 10 million. For every 10 million over you go, you pay an extra 10 million. So the owner can say, okay, I don't give a damn. I want to win. I'll pay 50 million like extra every year, which means that the owner gets less, like over time. But we had like the Boston Celtics do that. Like they paid very huge luxury taxes um, over um, a 3, 4, 5 year period because they had Jalen Brown earning huge money. They had Jason Tatum earning huge money. They had Drew Holiday earning huge money. So when you have so many players earning good money, um, it becomes a problem. So after they won the championship, they were like, okay, we no longer want to pay taxes. We have brought the championship home. They traded away some of their superstars, traded away Drew Holiday. Now Jalen Brown has been traded because they have to be within salary cap. If there was no salary cap, then you have one team having Steph Curry, Kevin Durant. I mean, it did happen that one team has Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, but that team worked because they had Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson wasn't earning as much as these guys, and Draymond Green wasn't earning as much as these guys. But imagine a team having Steph, KD, LeBron, Jokic, Wembanyama. You can't pay all of them because Wembanyama alone, I think he's signing a contract that would earn him around 60 million a year. Luka Doncic is earning around 60 million a year. So these guys, you just make sure that these guys cannot play together as much as possible. Um, So we then have, yeah, private equity and institutional capital. I think it's something that everyone should look into. There are many private equity firms that are investing in football. You have Clear Lake, Chelsea's investors, and they have a bunch of clubs. They have clubs, but I think that yeah, I mean they have a club in Strasbourg in France, and I think they have a Brazilian affiliates club. So you have these things where these private equity firms are coming to just change the landscape, to radicalize the landscape in a way that I find a bit uncomfortable because they come with their own, accountants, with their own lawyers, and they're always looking for any ways, any loopholes, any places they can breach, and it's a bit exhausting for the integrity of the game. But of course, you also have, sovereign funds. You have the Saudis, investing in mainstream the footballing ecosystem, but also being smart enough to invest in their own leagues. You have Qatar. It's a problem because of the power that they have, the sports washing that happens. I mean, I don't care so much about washing. Uh, I feel like sometimes the conversation can be a bit hypocritical because Qatar sports washes, it's trying to whitewash its image, but America is not sports washing, even though America has done like its own atrocities. So I don't like to get into sports washing. What I do know is that many times these countries just what I find problematic is that it affects the integrity of the game. You have cheating, the cheating Manchester City owners. I'm a Man United fan, so I don't like them, but they have 115 charges um, what they're looming over their heads, but they haven't been penalized. I believe the reason why they have not been penalized is because the owners of the club are too powerful. It becomes a problem when that is the case. So, within football, you have player contracts and image rights. Image rights are a bit different from standard player contracts. There are two different avenues to make money. The players, some players, live off their image rights. It's just a humongous amount of money. Mbappe and all these guys, when I worked, when I interned at Real Madrid, we did some work on player rights because Real Madrid has a lot of partners. Those partners pay Real Madrid separately for advertisements and stuff like that. So the players, have to negotiate and say, oh, Real Madrid, if somebody comes and, wants Real Madrid players to do an ad, like, and I'm called upon, how much am I going to get? So a player like Mbappe will be charging more for his image rights than a player like Ferland Mendy. So it just came to mind. So, that's the different thing from the contracts that you sign and the salaries that you're getting. It's something to look into. Um, what else do we have? I've spoken about collective bargaining versus individual power, which is an American and European thing. Um, Arbitration, the football world is governed by arbitration. So is the basketball world. Basketball in disputes between the NBA, the NBA and the Player Association are heard by arbitration by an arbitrator. They have an agreement in the collective bargaining agreements that says if we have a problem, we will go to arbitration. So within sports, you always have to know that arbitration is utilized. I've already spoken about CAS, the Court of Arbitration of Sports in Switzerland. Um, Anti-doping, very interesting. You know, there is the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA. I've been to their headquarters in 2022. It's a very interesting body, how they function. It's also very complex, very, very complex set of rules. Doping is it's a very heavily regulated ecosphere. We know, Modric of Chelsea is having problems with doping, but yeah, like it's really hard for me to get into to doping. But I do think that of course there has to be integrity, there has to be an equal playing field um, for everyone. But I do find that the regulations are a bit complex. Players sometimes struggle. The penalties are fixed, even when the player, for example, can demonstrate that he did not participate willingly. I think Andre Onana took his wife's pills one time, and it led to him having problems. There are many athletes who have gone to restaurants eating steak or something, and the list of banned substances is incredibly long, I'll say. So there have just been times where somebody took I think there was a case where somebody took an aspirin, and just because the spelling on the bottle was wrong, so they took something that was banned, and fortunately, they were banned for 2 years. So it's really, really regulated. It's really, really complex. It's not something I can just gloss over, but I hope I've been able to just give just a little bit of light there. So within football, of course, you have the myth of political neutrality. And I think nothing best illustrates this more than FIFA. FIFA had FIFA Gate. I encourage you to Google or ChatGPT FIFA Gate scandal involving Sepp Blatter. That was engineered. The demand for justice was spearheaded by the United States, who were disgruntled after losing out on hosting the World Cup, I think in 2018 or thereabout. And so, was it 2014 or 2018? So yeah, when America's ego is hurt, of course you can expect repercussions. That is not to say FIFA wasn't uh, culpable. They were culpable, and they paid the price. There was so much corruption going on, briberies being exchanged left, right, and center. The FBI investigated and tried these guys under RICO charges. Anybody who knows RICO charges knows that it is mostly mentioned for drug dealers and people who are doing high level crimes. So they use the same regulations to try these FIFA officials. Um, Then, we have, I think one thing that happens in football that's not often spoken about is the agents. I did speak about how there is sometimes people go out of the footballing world to seek recourse. Agents have been fighting FIFA for a long time. Agents have been tussling with them because FIFA tried to set a cap on agent fees. And it's an interesting point because agents are also crazy sometimes. They charge very ridiculous fees, they act rogue. Um, I think some of you might know Mino Raiola. He's one of the most popular agents before his unfortunate demise. He was the representative of Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Erling Haaland, and Paul Pogba. And for the Pogba deal, he made around 36 million euros from that transaction. I can't remember the figure, but I know it's anywhere between 18 to 36 million. He acted as intermediary for Juventus, who were the selling club. He acted as intermediary for Man United, who were the buying club, and then he was the agent of the player, and he made money from each and every one of those parties. So he made a ridiculous amount of money. Of course, football clubs pay that because they want to get premium talent, but it becomes a problem, when smaller clubs are edged out with people like Eden Hazard, for example. I think one of the reasons he didn't join Man United when before moving to Chelsea was because Roman Abramovich paid backdoor payments to his agents. So these things complicate football and creates a very messed up system. We've spoken about the Super League shreds. Uh, yeah, there's the problems with the talents. FIFA does have a system. So one of the most interesting cases in football was the case of Jean Bosman. So we many times if you're within the football world, you hear the Bosman transfer. That was one of the cases where somebody challenged the footballing system. So of course, the principle of specificity of sport has given the football world some leverage, some protection, some privileges further. And there was what happened then was that your contracts could run down with the club, right? And even when your contract has expired or you've run down your contract, the club still would sell you for money. Like the club was still entitled to keep you and sell you. So this guy, John Bossman, he finishes, runs down his contract, and he wants to leave. And the club says, "No, we own you." And the club is asking for, I think, 2 million at a time or 1 million to sell him. And it's like, guys, why are you asking for this kind of ridiculous money? Like, I'm not contractually bound to you. And so it was like, and of course, the footballing world was protecting him because that was what was the norm within the system. And so he said, okay, you know what, guys, I'm going to support the party. I'm going to go to the European Court of Justice. He went to the European Court of Justice, and the Court of Justice affirmed his right to, affirmed the EU's regulation to that, labor has to move freely around. Individuals should have the right to move freely and work where they want. So FIFA had to respond to that because one of the reasons and one of the benefits of tying players down even after the contract has expired was that the clubs got benefits for the investment that they made. So because if a club has trained you in its facilities and helped you grow and improve and blah 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 blah, they kind of have a claim to the player that you are. So FIFA had to then, since FIFA had to let go of this system and players were now allowed to move freely upon uh, the end of their contract, the termination, natural course or termination of the contract, allowed to go wherever they want. They became free agents, absolutely. So that meant that FIFA had to step in. FIFA then introduced the solidarity payments and training compensation, which is a very important component within football. So if you move on your contract, even when you move for transfer fees, a particular percentage of the transfer fees is given to all the clubs who were involved in training the player up to the age of, I think, 16 or 17. Um, if you move on a free transfer, payments are still due to the clubs that trained you up to a particular point. I think this only expires when the player is late 20s or thereabouts. So that's something to know. I don't know how it can be used the debate, but I guess it's important to know that there are any more things that we have. I think I've spoken about every everything. Multi-club ownership networks is one of the things that sovereign funds and um, equity firms introduced when they became owners of clubs. So, you have the owners of Man City. Um, uh, they they own multiple clubs. They own a club in Spain. They own a club I think they own New York FC in the US. They own one club in Spain. Is it Granada? I doubt. I can't remember specifically. They own Man City. So yeah, I think it's called the City Ownership Group, if I'm not mistaken. So that multi-club ownership creates problems. Chelsea is run the same way by Claire Lake. Claire Lake owns Chelsea and owns the French team. The name has skipped my mind. I mentioned it earlier in the podcast. So Strasbourg. So the problem is that the Strasbourg becomes a feeder club for Chelsea. So Chelsea doesn't want a player, they loan the player to Strasbourg, and then player plays there, performs well 1 or 2 seasons, they bring him back, and it becomes a bit of a mess. They hoard talent. But the idea generally for the multi-club ownership model is, to just, it's about advertisement too. It's about, if you work with a brand, you say, we own 5 clubs. We are going to make you global. You can charge more. You can leverage more. So it's a bit interesting. I do know for a fact that it's something that the footballing authorities are trying to get to the root of, at least regulate as much as possible. So there it is. I think I've covered the field. Like I said, it's not about depth. If perhaps it's a guardian of sports lawyers, and I know they are interested in exploring the deepest of waters. But for this kind of conversation, I think this is it. If there's anything you need more information on, as always, ChatGPT or those AI bots that can help.
Okay, all right. Awesome. Thank you so much for the session, F. I've actually personally learned a lot, even though I watch football and I follow the NBA too. So I think the examples you were using were very relatable and they were very insightful. But I do have some like quick follow-up questions, right? So I think
All
the
right.
last time in a spa, in vacation spas, we had the conversation of women's sports come up, right? Especially when there was a protest going on by the WNBA that they were wearing t-shirts that says pay us what we are worth because they felt they were being cheated as compared to how much the men were being paid in the NBA. So the question I want to ask is there any provisions like the way you mentioned that there were player associations for the men? Are there such similar things for the WNBA, and how would such a problem be solved?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and my bad for
That
forgetting
issue in
about
sports.
yeah, like my bad for forgetting about women's sports. But it's pretty much the same structure, anyways. Um, whether it's women's football, not all clubs have women's in Europe. Not all clubs have women's teams. More, adding that to their portfolio within the US. The WNBA has the exact same structure. They have bargaining agreements that they sign, and their pay is recently increased. They struck a new deal with the Women's Player Association, struck a new deal, and they get more money. There's a higher minimum. I think they doubled the minimum salary, I think from 200K to 500K, something like this. I really don't know the numbers, but there was progress. I think the conversation is a bit skewed sometimes. It's a bit disingenuous around women's sports because, you know, like there's an element of equity, but within sports, like businessmen want numbers. if you demonstrate that you generate more than you're being paid, it's a whole different conversation from, well, men are paid this, therefore pay us that. That doesn't make as much sense, as people like to believe. And of course, you have liberals online. These things that excite them. So there's always going to be that war, that tussle, in a way. So the system is the same. Like the women have their own associations. They get into battles with the league. I think, the last the women's this recent agreement that was struck was a bit ugly at some point. One of the president of the women's player association, released the press was in it made had a press conference where she was accusing the president of the WNBA of certain things. So there's they have the systems, they have the structure within football. It's a bit different since they have nobody to collectively speak out for, no platform to collectively speak out. But I think clubs are trying. FIFA, Premier League is incentivizing clubs. For example, in the Premier League, like losses that you make for your women's team are not calculated as losses for the club when they are factoring in your accounting statements. So I think that's an incentive because if clubs were penalized for losses that they suffer for women's football, no club will invest in women's football because it's like I think it takes a lot of grinding. But European women's football is growing, it's doing well. I think Barcelona has a very good team. So, yeah, a staple Champions League. Arsenal has a great team. Chelsea does have a great team. Man United has a team that is on the ascendancy. I think the Man United had theirs more recently. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. The question is on the future of technology, isn't it? Within sports.
Yes, exactly. Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, there's really not much. Like sometimes it is what it is. It's what we see. Like technology is here to stay. VR does make sense. The application, nobody can really like say for a fact that. I guess it's just discretion, Like the offside rule is the offside rule. It hurts sometimes when it's 1 inch, 2 inches. But even if you increase the threshold, it will still be like there will still be the 1 inch margin. So if you say, for example, the full player's body has to be off, if the player is onside or offside by a stroke or the skin of the tooth or a strand of hair, it's still the margins are still the margins. But technology has improved football. Goal line technology is stunning. It's there to stay. Everybody agrees with goal line technology. The application of VR, like I think the biggest problem people have is that it's not widespread. Number one, it's not consistently applied. You see instances where referees will check certain things and not check certain things. I think it's just more of a refereeing problem than the VR problem because VR is technology is simply let's have a chance to review this. For me, the biggest problem like is when you review it, the manner in which you review it matters. Like if you're going to review every frame, like of the tackle, slow it down completely and amplify every single inch, of the frame. It becomes, a challenge to handle that. So I really don't see any crazy problems, any uncertainties like with application of technology in sports. I struggling to think of anything. I just think that yeah, it's what it is. It's here to stay. It has improved the game. Like some people are sensitive about it. I understand, but I really can't imagine football without VR anymore. Just go look at the old clips, old games. Every time, like offsides, every game had one wrong offside call, many goals. Like there are just so many problems. So I think like now it's just about the referees being smarter, applying their discretion. Um, yeah, just knowing what to do because you have a second chance, a second shot. Use that well. Like that's what the refs have to do. You're looking at this image. It's frustrating when the refs look at an image twice, thrice, and then they still get it wrong. I think that's what people need. But generally, I think it's good.
Okay, all right, fantastic. Thanks for that answer. Yeah, I also agree, by the way, like I think discretion, because in the past AFCON, the one that just ended, we saw the referees make very
Yep.
awesome use of VAR. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
definitely agree on that. Okay, okay, then one
All
last
right.
question to wrap this up is the issue of transgender inclusion in sports, especially in track, competitions. The chat is, should we have these regulatory bodies make laws that says, okay, you should allow transgender participation to some extent, or should be allowed for discretion? Say if they're organizing the Diamond League or something, then they would set up their own inclusion metrics that, okay, we're going to allow trans people in this one, but not this one. It's a bit messy. So what do you think on that?
For me, it's more of a political issue than a sporting issue. Like, as a sporting body, as a FIFA president, I don't want to have to like regulate or legislate on this. Like, it's what society agrees that we bring. Yes, like sports can be um trailblazers for advocacy, for advancement, and all that stuff. And but I really don't see like sometimes when the like transgender like the details on like the transgender sphere I think is more it's more fragile, it's more complex than, for example, um not allowing persons of color to compete in sports. Like that's more of a low-hanging fruit. But the transgender issue, there's more sentimentalism about it. Like the athletes themselves, think that this person has a biological advantage. So if it then becomes, because remember that this is an ecosystem that bans doping. What is doping? Doping is you having more of an advantage than the other person. Yeah, but the thing is, doping is also arbitrary in a sense because some people have biological advantages, but I guess it's just about, being able to just lay a hand on what exactly the ramifications are. Because yeah, Michael Phelps has biological advantages. He has a large wingspan. Basketballers have great advantages. Wembanyama is 7'5", so biological advantages vary and they're different across board. So it's really hard to determine what should be allowed and what should not be allowed. But I guess the footballing world, no, the sporting world made a breakthrough by saying, okay, let's have this list of things you cannot use, which are proven to enhance your performance. And if you use them, you're a cheat. So we know about the variance in testosterone levels amongst men and women. They're different things. So I wouldn't see this as something that I myself want to like be out there having an opinion. If I'm going to have an opinion, it's going to be a theological opinion. But I see things in this case more on that side than on the sporting side. The sporting side purely is about merit. The question is if this person has a biological, like, look, we have weight categories in boxing. Like if you're heavyweight, you fight heavyweight. If you're middleweight, you fight middleweight. If you're lightweight, you fight lightweight. So we understand that there has to be that kind of equilibrium, especially like um, in athletics and more than anywhere else. If it's boxing, if you're getting into a ring with somebody, you have to. There has to be that equity or equilibrium. Unfortunately, sometimes that drive, that obsession leads to people making false accusations. At the last Olympics, I think there was a woman who was wrongly accused of being transgender. I think she was from Nigeria or Morocco, one of the North North African countries. So okay, then it then becomes a problem. But at the heart of the transgender thing is who is a woman, who is a man? Like if somebody's born a woman and they still have the biological composition and the benefits that come with masculinity, should they be allowed to say that they're women? So these things are just like there's no way to. I think they'll always be debatable until we all die. Like it's always going to be a debate. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now, you will still have debates about this because it's blurry. And of course, like liberals will say we are very sure of what we're saying, or this is everybody should be allowed to do whatever they want to do. Conservatives are also certain about, their view and their perception on this, and so it's a bit of a mess. I don't like think it's overwhelmingly important for me to, you know, just say, oh, this is how it should be, or this is what it should not be. Like whatever your convictions are within, of course, we keep our convictions aside in debating. I wouldn't say there's one conviction that is stronger than the other in a non-theological context, because I believe that the only truth only exists within, seeking God, seeking God's truth within humans. If you remove God from the equation, then it's just fisticuffs. Like it's just humans arguing about their preferences, about what their truth is. So there's no longer truth. Like I believe that God is truth and what God says is law, but the other person might not believe that. If I'm talking with somebody who believes in the same God, then we have, common ground. But if I'm talking with somebody who doesn't, and then it's a debate, and of course the God factor doesn't come in, it becomes a whole different debate, and then everybody can formulate their own arguments. Everybody has to be fair to understand the ramifications of the arguments, but yeah, I don't think it's definite because yeah, even if you you say, oh yeah, trans women should be banned, blah blah blah. There's some women who do have just naturally, like Semenya Williams, had problems because she had high testosterone levels, but she was a woman, in fact, not trans, and she had problems that she had to go to CAS, even out of CAS, appeal to the European Court of Justice. So yeah, it's a bit. I think it's the most fictional sporting issue that we have.
Mm. Okay, okay. I definitely agree. Hopefully, we should just give the relevant arguments that are required if you find yourself in a debate. But I guess outside the debate, you can find middle grounds in normal social conversations with people when you discuss these things. Yeah, because there is
Of
no
course,
pressure
of
to coming
course,
around. Yes.
of
Okay.
course.
Hmm. Well, then that should be it for our session today.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule for us. We appreciate you
All
for
right.
that. Okay.
All right. No, no no worries. Thank you very much to I wish you guys well, everyone in tournaments and in the debating community. It's always a pleasure, like I said. So all the best and goodbye.
Goodbye, F.
Thanks.